Okay, so today I'm going to be talking you through the two poems which can be used in discussion with each other, The Little Girl Lost and The Little Girl Found from William Blake's Songs of Innocence section. Now this is another one of those poems where it can be contested whether it belongs in Songs of Experience, but for the purposes of our own anthology provided by AQA, it is in the Songs of Innocence. Now, in the anthology as well, it just follows a poem called A Dream. And within that poem, we're left to question whether dreams are fictional places and therefore have an inability to be real. There's going to be lots of references to sleeping, dreaming, nightmares in the poems that we're about to be talking about. Now, this poem is written first and foremost in an AABB rhyming scheme, so you've got those clear rhyming couplets which you can discuss, and also it is written in trimeter. Now trimeter refers to when the units, or also known as the feet of a line, have been sort of divided into three parts. So those sorts of skills combined is creating quite a simplistic sort of jovial beat to the poem, which you might want to be commenting on, because whilst it's kind of touching on Leica as this sort of innocent, vulnerable, very naive character, actually the things that she goes through gives her a sense of strength in her own right. So the poem first begins then with this sort of vision from the speaker, offering sort of a future world and what that world can look like. And he talks about this world when it emerges from sleep. So that's what I've highlighted the line here, that the earth from sleep. So this idea that he's discussing a vision of the future after this fallen earth has come back and redeemed itself and been restored. So there's kind of that possibility and hope that after the fall of man and earth, that there can be a way to redeem ourselves. And it also suggests that after this experience, we shall arise and seek for her maker meek. So suggesting that God is taking up this idea that God is a lamb, and that sort of gentle, forgiving figure, as opposed to the harsher betrayal that God can often be credited in the Old Testament, and how that we have emerged from the desert wild. So the word wild there suggesting that the sins, the curse of the wilderness, away from paradise, but actually how that paradise in its sort of chaotic and dark form has created a garden mild. So suggests then that we've kind of come back to this sort of innocence and this kind of beauty in order to restore man. And also suggesting there that it is not a judgment day whereby you're kind of summoned by God, but actually one where humans can undergo their own transformation and seeking out God on themselves. There's also a reference here to the image of the Israelites who were wandering after escaping from Egypt before having reached the Promised Land. So there is that biblical undertone that you might want to read into that as well. So then as we proceed with the poem, we begin to learn about the key character, lovely Leica, who's laying asleep. We've got references to the summer's prime, and also the 7 summers old, so the 7 days of creation in there. And essentially, Leica goes on her own spiritual and sexual journey of experience in the poem, which is greatly sort of discouraged and feared by her parents. And as the poem progresses, Leica is actually fine. She's protected by the wilderness and by those sort of almost dangerous predatory creatures, and actually is at peace at the end of the poem. And then the next poem that follows, which is The Little Girl Found, covers the journey of her parents as they go on a journey to recovering her, fearing the worst, but actually seeing that she's fine, and seeing, having their own epiphany, and viewing religion and also sexual experience in a very different way, rather than something that should be frowned upon and something that should be feared for their child, essentially. So we have lovely Leica, so the use of alliteration there when she's first introduced, once again kind of provides her to be this sort of angelic, innocent, spiritual figure, that is kind of symbolizing the human soul who's been wandering through the desert and has been, well, found sleeping in experience. And as she's there, as she's wandering through the wilderness, she is hearing wild bird songs. So it's this idea that actually children have a special affinity or a special relationship with nature, and that they both work in harmony together. But as she's approaching slumber or her sleep, she's thinking about her mum and dad that are crying over her and weeping. And it's almost that is the thing that disturbs her from her sleep, rather than her own anxieties and fears of what might become of her as she goes on this journey for experience. And that idea of weeping and sadness associated with her parents continues to occur in this poem, particularly as it's seen as her mother is the one that is weeping. So it's almost like Leica is being sort of drawn back or withheld by her mother's fears and upset, rather than seeing an opportunity of the wilderness and the good that it can create. So that once again continues. And it's almost like here Leica is becoming a model to her own parents about how you can rid yourself of sexual guilt. It's not something to be embarrassed by or ashamed by, but actually it's something to celebrate, and kind of that's why it fits in with this idea of Songs of Innocence again. Blake is an advocate for free love, and rather than monogamy and being sort of chained to one person in effect, he's kind of suggesting that relationships should be free to flourish, rather than them feeling confined in any way. And as we approach then this next stanza of the Frowning Night, we have this image of the moon which is arising, and it could be a reference to Diana, who is the goddess of virginity. So she's kind of being guarded and protected by this goddess in this world of wilderness and experience. And she's able to sleep quite comfortably here, whilst the beasts of prey from the cavern steep viewed the maid asleep. So as a reader, we're thinking, oh God, Leica is about to be sort of tainted, or she's going to be devoured by these beasts in some way. But actually, it's the very opposite of that, as the lion is introduced to be a kingly figure, strong, a protector, rather than this predatory beast. And as he's viewing her as the virgin, even the leopards and tigers come out to play. But even the use of the verb play there is interesting, because obviously they're not they're not fighting against each other, they're playing. So there's that softening of even their actions. And actually she's kind of introduced to this new vision of experience, one that isn't as dangerous and nasty as one that is often painted out, particularly in the Old Testament. And this idea about the lion being compared to gold and sort of regal imagery continues in this poem, and as though he is this kind of figure of strength to her. He even has a mane of gold, but what he does so it mentions there that, and her bosom lick, and upon her neck, from his eyes of flame, ruby tears there came. So this obviously has overtones of a sexual nature, but it's not one that is intimidating, but is actually perhaps welcomed and feels to be a lot softer, rather than sort of a negative experience. And even at the end, Leica herself is compared to a lioness, and she has her loose slender dress, which is obviously kind of connecting to her with sexual imagery again. But she's naked there, so the nakedness is always going to be an image associated with innocence. And to go into the cave with the sleeping maid, cave there, it could be a symbol of protection, of safety, rather than something dark and sinister. But it's interesting how in that image you can kind of see both interpretations there. And then at the close of the poem, the fact that she's sleeping means that she's obviously found comfort and ease in this environment and is at peace in this. And actually, it's a positive experience for her rather than something incredibly frightening and negative. So it's almost like that without her parents for guidance, she's been able to kind of navigate her own way through the wilderness or through this world of experience, and she successfully undergoes this and becomes more sexually liberated and mature without the guidance and sort of rulings of her parents. So as I mentioned before, the little girl found is more of a journey about her parents undergoing of, well, their own sort of experience, rather than seeing sexual liberation as sort of a negative thing to be frowned upon and shamed upon, but actually one that is encouraged by the end of the poem. So we start the poem with lots of references again to this sorrow, sadness, woe. I'd address that as a semantic field, so grouped words that all kind of are linked and similar. And at the start of the poem, essentially they're fearing for Leica's well-being outside of their own care, and they're fearing her exposure to her sexual experiences because she's out in the desert, in the wilderness, and they can only think about all of the awful things that could potentially happen to her rather than seeing this as that opportunity. So once again, tired and woebegone. So once again, references to the 7 days, so the creation. So it's almost like that they are their own sort of an allegory, as it were, of Adam and Eve themselves. They have become self-conscious, they're full of shame, so they're the Adam and Eve post the fall of man. And actually it's about them going on their journey and a process of restoration and a returning to paradise, or this moment of harmony that they have been so far removed from at this point in their lives. So once again, references to sleeping and dreaming, but they take the role of nightmares and actually seeing that sleep and dreaming is as a negative interplay, because it's only perhaps when you're lying in bed struggling to sleep or kind of fearing things that you're actually really able to open up and sort of overanalyze those thoughts and feelings. And it can also be said that dreams and sleep actually open up areas to the brain or the imagination that actually the conscious mind isn't quite able to access. So yeah, it's interesting that for the parents, their sleep and their experience of sleep always turns to ideas of fearing rather than contentment. But it actually allows them a medium to be able to express these feelings and emotions. There's also this reference to starving in a desert wild, which could be a link here with Jesus, as this is an experience that he also found himself in as well, as he kind of navigates his own way to harmony again. And as they're going on this journey, they're imagining Leica pale, as though she is weak and as though she's shrieking and just unable to exist really without their support. And it's that sort of mental torture that which wears the mother down, and it's here that her feet give way, she can go no further, so it has to be the case that her husband is the one to carry her forward on this journey. But as they continue, they notice a couching lion lay, so from the offset, we think that this lion could be symbolizing danger. There is some sort of predatory force. And in the Old Testament, actually, the lion is often compared to this ferocious power, and kind of negative energy associated within creation and the creation of creatures, really. So therefore, we're kind of thinking that this is going to be quite a negative turn in the poem, but actually it's the opposite, as the beast here actually doesn't mean any harm and guides the parents through this journey. And as we continue, we see that he approaches the parents, smelling to his prey, but actually he licks their hands. So the animal here was, from the offset, a bit of a threat to them, but now he has been refashioned to be something quite benevolent and actually innocent in his interactions with the parents. And they're quite surprised by this. They're filled with deep surprise, and kind of not really sure what to take from this experience. But actually, then we have this sort of this lexical or semantic field of gold. So a spirit armed in gold is wearing a crown, golden hair. So there's this kingly image of the lion here, as though he is his own regal nature himself. And actually, now they're really looking at this beast, they're able to see that he is this glorious spirit and representing a more noble society, as opposed to one that is representing danger and fear, I suppose. The lion then says for the parents to follow him, and now he's taking them to his palace rather than his cave. So once again, there's that continuation of that imagery associated with kingship and regality. So it's almost like up until this point, the parents have been living in this world of experience, and it's taught them many fears. So therefore, they were just unable to be able to see Leica living in a world that she can feel safe in. As they follow the lion, they're able to see their sleeping child, so in a state of pure innocence, in pure safety, rather than anything that they have imagined before this. And even around that, you've got the tigers that are wild, so representative of that experience, that unruliness, but actually they're living in harmony rather than something that is terrifying and sort of deathly. And as we conclude the poem, the parents then admit that they don't fear the wolfish howl nor the lion's growl. So it's almost like at the end of the poem, they have attained their own sense of harmony, which was lost to begin with by their fears of their daughter and of her encountering this experience of a sexual awakening, and seeing it as something that should be embraced, and coming to that realization that their child is totally able to navigate through the world of experience and maturity on her own.